The young student stepped into the Grand Music Academy with a mix of excitement and nervousness. The hallways smelled faintly of polished wood and old sheet music, a smell that carried with it the promise of creativity and discipline. She had always loved music, but entering this prestigious academy felt like stepping into a world she had only dreamed of. Every corner seemed alive with quiet murmurs of students practicing, the soft tap of piano keys, and the occasional hum of a violin string. She clutched her sheet music tightly, her fingers brushing over the worn pages that held hours of practice and countless small victories. She was greeted by a tall, stern-looking music professor known throughout the academy for her brilliant mind and unconventional teaching methods. The professor's reputation preceded her. She was strict, demanding, and had an uncanny ability to spot hidden talent in her students. Today, she had arranged to observe this new student, curious to see how she would handle the challenges of the academy. The student was led into a bright practice room where a grand piano stood in the center. Its polished black surface reflected the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, and walked toward the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, a mix of anticipation and nervous energy running through her. She had practiced for years, but this was the first time she would be evaluated by someone of such high stature. The professor watched quietly, her eyes sharp and observant. She did not speak at first, letting the student settle into the room. Then, in a voice calm but commanding, she instructed, "Play the piece you have been preparing. Take your time and feel each note." The student nodded and began to play. Her fingers moved with grace and precision, but there was more to her performance than just technical skill. She seemed to understand the music on a deeper level, feeling its patterns, anticipating its flow, and bringing out nuances that were not immediately obvious on the sheet. Halfway through, the professor did something unusual. She played a few notes on another piano across the room, deliberately introducing a wrong melody. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the student noticed it immediately. Her brow furrowed slightly, and she paused for just a moment, her ears catching the discrepancy. Most students might have continued playing, unaware, but she instinctively recognized that something was off. It was not just a wrong note. It disrupted the underlying rhythm and pattern she had been following. She corrected the melody in her mind and continued playing, adjusting effortlessly to the unexpected twist. The professor's eyes widened slightly behind her glasses. This was not the usual reaction she expected. Instead of faltering or hesitating, the student adapted, her hands moving fluidly, almost as if she had anticipated the change before it happened. The professor had seen many talented students in her years, but this response was unusual. It was not just musical talent. It hinted at a mind that could perceive structure, detect patterns, and solve problems quickly. After the piece ended, the room fell silent for a moment. The student lowered her hands from the piano and took a deep breath, her heartbeat gradually slowing. She felt a sense of accomplishment but also a hint of curiosity. The professor had not said a word yet, and she wondered what was going through her mind. The professor finally spoke, her voice still calm but tinged with intrigue. "You have an unusual way of understanding music. Most students rely on memorization or emotion alone, but you seem to approach it with logic as well as feeling. That is rare." The student blushed slightly, unsure how to respond. She had always felt that music made sense to her in a way that was different from others. She could see patterns, predict sequences, and understand harmonies not just emotionally but almost mathematically. Yet she had never shared this perspective with anyone. It was a private way of interacting with music. Hearing it acknowledged by the professor both surprised and encouraged her. The professor invited her to sit down and asked a few questions about her background, her practice routines, and her approach to learning music. The student spoke honestly, describing how she would analyze a piece, identify recurring patterns, and practice difficult sections by breaking them down into smaller components. She talked about her love for problem solving, her fascination with structure, and the satisfaction she felt when everything fell into place perfectly. The professor listened intently, occasionally nodding, clearly impressed by the depth of thought behind her talent. After a while, the professor suggested a small exercise. She played a short, unusual melody and asked the student to follow along and correct any discrepancies. The student listened carefully, her eyes narrowing in concentration. She immediately recognized the off notes and adjusted her playing without hesitation. Again, the professor watched in silent amazement. This was more than just musical skill. It was an analytical mind at work, seamlessly blending logic with creativity. As the session ended, the professor offered some words of encouragement. You have potential that goes beyond what most students show at this stage. Keep nurturing both your musical and analytical abilities. They complement each other in ways that can lead to something extraordinary. The student left the room feeling a mixture of pride and curiosity. She wondered what the professor saw in her that she herself had not fully recognized. There was a spark of excitement, a sense that her journey at this academy would be unlike anything she had imagined. Walking down the hallway, she thought about the unusual test and her response to it. Most people might have been thrown off by the wrong melody, but she had instinctively corrected it. That instinct, combined with her understanding of patterns, seemed to set her apart. She realized that music was not just an art form for her. It was also a language, a puzzle, a system to explore. And perhaps, this was what made her different, what made her special in ways she was only beginning to understand. By the end of the day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The academy was challenging, and the professor demanding, but she was ready. She had glimpsed the possibilities of what she could achieve, and it motivated her to work harder, to explore deeper, and to see where her unique talents could take her. The encounter with the professor had not just been a test of skill, it had been a revelation. She had discovered a new dimension to her abilities, one that combined passion with intellect, emotion with logic, and art with precision. As she walked home that evening, she imagined herself sitting at the piano, exploring melodies, patterns, and harmonies with the same careful attention she had brought to the test. She could almost see the structure of music in a way that was as clear as numbers on a page. It was exhilarating, and she knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges, there would be mistakes, and there would be moments of doubt, but she felt ready. The encounter had shown her that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined, and she was determined to embrace it fully. The next day, the student arrived at the music academy with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She remembered the unusual test from the previous session, and it had left her both curious and determined. She wondered what the professor had seen in her performance, and she felt a quiet thrill at the thought of facing whatever challenge might come next. The hallways were alive again with the sounds of practice, students moving from one room to another, their music blending into a soft, continuous hum. When she entered the practice room, the professor was already there, sitting quietly at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. She looked up as the student entered and smiled faintly. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling that today's session would be different from the usual lessons. The professor motioned for the student to sit at the piano, and the student complied, feeling her pulse quicken. Today, the professor began, I want to see how you handle something unexpected. Music is not always perfect, and a true musician knows how to respond when things go wrong. She played a few notes deliberately out of tune, a melody that almost seemed chaotic to anyone listening casually. The student's ears immediately caught the discrepancies, and her mind raced to understand the patterns and the errors. Without hesitation, she adjusted her playing, correcting the melody as she continued. The professor watched intently, noticing how quickly and smoothly the student adapted. Each wrong note was met with a precise adjustment, and she began to introduce slightly more complex variations. The student responded to each, her fingers moving confidently, almost as if she had anticipated the challenge. There was a rhythm to her thinking, a method in her approach that went beyond just listening. She was analyzing, predicting, and solving musical puzzles in real time. As the session progressed, the professor increased the difficulty further. She introduced subtle variations in tempo, changed rhythms unexpectedly, and even added complex chords that were slightly off. Most students would have stumbled, but the student handled each new challenge with surprising ease. She began to notice relationships between the notes, patterns within the mistakes, and ways to harmonize them seamlessly. It was as though her mind was decoding a musical puzzle, turning confusion into clarity with every keystroke. The professor leaned back slightly, allowing the student space to explore. She had wanted to see not just skill but creativity under pressure, and she was not disappointed. The student's movements were fluid, her concentration absolute, and there was a spark in her eyes that spoke of deep engagement. She was learning, adapting, and growing in real time, demonstrating a level of insight that was rare in someone so young. At one point, the professor stopped and asked the student to explain what she was doing. The student paused, taking a breath, and began to describe her thought process. She talked about listening for patterns, anticipating where the music would naturally flow, and correcting deviations based on a combination of intuition and logical reasoning. She mentioned noticing symmetry in the melodies, the relationships between intervals, and how certain sequences led to predictable outcomes. The professor listened, fascinated by the clarity and depth of the student's explanations. It became clear to the professor that the student was not only musically gifted but also analytically sharp. She was seeing music in a way that combined art and science, intuition and logic. This duality made her approach unique, and the professor realized that the student had the potential to excel far beyond ordinary musical skill. She began to design exercises that would test this combination further, blending musical performance with mental problem solving. The student was asked to play a piece she had never seen before, one that contained irregular rhythms and unexpected chord changes. She studied the sheet music carefully, her eyes scanning for patterns and possible errors. As she played, she instinctively adjusted for mistakes, corrected tempo shifts, and even suggested slight variations to improve the overall flow. Her performance was not just accurate, it was innovative. The professor watched silently, impressed by the student's ability to turn a challenge into an opportunity for creative expression. After the exercise, the professor gave the student a challenge in a slightly different form. She played a short melody and asked the student to replicate it. But with a twist, the melody contained hidden patterns based on numerical sequences. Most students would struggle to notice the underlying structure, but the student picked up on it almost immediately. She began to interpret the music not only by ear but also through the logical relationships between the notes, discovering connections that were invisible to others. This exercise revealed a surprising talent. The student was not just responding to mistakes. She was understanding the architecture of the music, predicting outcomes, and making adjustments based on a systematic approach. The professor realized that her ability to combine musical sensitivity with analytical reasoning was rare, a blend that could lead to extraordinary accomplishments in the future. Throughout the session, the professor continued to introduce increasingly subtle challenges, each designed to test different aspects of her abilities. She varied tempos, changed keys unexpectedly, and inserted unexpected harmonies. The student adapted to each one, demonstrating patience, focus, and resilience. She did not become frustrated by mistakes or unfamiliar patterns. Instead, she saw them as puzzles to solve. Her mind seemed to operate on multiple levels at once, listening, analyzing, and performing simultaneously. By the end of the day, both the student and the professor felt a sense of achievement. The student had grown more confident, realizing that her abilities could handle even the most unexpected challenges. She had discovered a new way of thinking about music, one that blended intuition with logic, emotion with reason. The professor, meanwhile, had confirmed what she had suspected. This student was extraordinary. She was more than a talented musician. She was a thinker, a problem solver, and a creative mind capable of seeing connections that others missed. The student left the academy that day with a renewed sense of purpose. She was eager to continue exploring the relationship between music and logic, to test herself against new challenges, and to understand her own abilities more deeply. The experience had shown her that her talent was not just in playing notes correctly, but in perceiving patterns, solving problems, and adapting creatively. It was a skill that could take her far, if nurtured and guided correctly. As she walked home, the music from her practice lingered in her mind. She replayed the exercises, analyzed the patterns, and imagined new ways to approach them. She realized that every challenge, every unexpected melody, was an opportunity to learn and grow. And she knew that with the professor's guidance, she could explore her abilities further, discovering new dimensions of her talent that she had never imagined. The session had been more than a test. It had been a revelation. The student understood herself better, saw her potential more clearly, and felt a deep excitement for the journey ahead. The academy, the professor, and the challenges she faced had opened doors to possibilities she had never considered. Music was no longer just a passion. It was a world of patterns, logic, and creativity waiting to be explored. And she was ready to explore it fully, step by step, melody by melody, challenge by challenge. The student returned to the academy the next day, feeling a mix of anticipation and curiosity. After the previous sessions, she had begun to notice her own abilities in a new way. Music was no longer just about playing the right notes or keeping time. It was about patterns, structure, and understanding the hidden logic that connected every melody and rhythm. She carried this awareness into the practice room, ready to explore further. The professor greeted her with a calm, knowing smile. There was no need for words yet. The look in the professor's eyes conveyed that today's session would be different. She led the student to the piano and handed her a sheet of music she had never seen before. The piece looked complicated at first glance, with irregular rhythms, unexpected chord changes, and intricate sequences that could easily confuse any musician. Play it as you feel it, but listen carefully to how the piece is structured, the professor instructed. Notice patterns, predict what comes next, and adapt if needed. There is more to music than the notes on the page. The student nodded, her fingers lightly brushing the keys as she began. She took her time, observing the piece before attempting to play, almost as if she were deciphering a puzzle. Each measure revealed a pattern, a logic behind the sequence of notes, and she began to anticipate the transitions even before her fingers reached them. As she played, the professor added subtle twists. Occasionally, a note would be slightly off or a rhythm would shift unexpectedly. Most students would have been thrown off, but she recognized the changes instantly. Instead of reacting with hesitation, she adjusted, weaving the variations seamlessly into her performance. Her mind was working on multiple levels, listening, analyzing, and performing at the same time. After a few minutes, the professor stopped her. "Explain what you are noticing," she said, leaning back and observing. The student took a deep breath and described what she had detected. She spoke about recurring motifs, the symmetry she noticed in the melody, and the relationships between different measures. She mentioned how certain chord progressions suggested predictable movements, and how even irregular rhythms had underlying logic if one looked closely. The professor listened silently, amazed at the depth of understanding. Then, the professor did something unusual. She handed the student a short, handwritten melody on a small sheet of paper. "This is not just music," she said softly. "It is a puzzle. See if you can figure out its pattern and play it correctly." The student looked at the notes carefully, noticing sequences that mirrored numerical patterns she had encountered in math. She could almost see the melody as numbers and structures, each note connecting logically to the next. She began to play, following both the sound and the structure she had perceived. Her performance was precise yet expressive. Each note seemed to follow an invisible thread, leading naturally to the next. The professor's eyes widened as she realized that the student was not only correcting errors but anticipating and solving the hidden logic behind the piece. It was as if the student could see music not just as sound but as a system of patterns, relationships, and rules. This was beyond ordinary musical talent. It was genius at work. After the exercise, the professor sat quietly for a moment, then spoke. "I believe you are capable of understanding more than just music. You see patterns where others do not. You approach problems in a way that is both creative and analytical. Have you ever considered that your abilities might extend beyond music?" The student paused, surprised. She had always felt that music came naturally to her in a structured way, but she had never thought of it as connected to other fields. She nodded slowly, intrigued by the suggestion. To explore this further, the professor gave her a set of musical puzzles disguised as compositions. Each one contained hidden structures, sequences, and relationships that required careful observation and reasoning. The student approached them with intense focus, her fingers moving across the keys while her mind mapped out the underlying logic. She corrected subtle inconsistencies, predicted sequences before they happened, and even suggested small improvements that enhanced the flow. It was clear that her understanding went far beyond memorization or instinct. It was analytical, logical, and deeply intuitive. Throughout the session, the professor introduced small numerical patterns into the music, sequences that required the student to recognize mathematical relationships while playing. The student noticed these patterns almost immediately, integrating them seamlessly into her performance. It was as if music and math were two sides of the same coin in her mind, each enhancing the understanding of the other. The professor watched in amazement, realizing that this combination of skills was extraordinarily rare. By the end of the day, both the student and the professor had experienced something remarkable. The student had discovered a new dimension to her talent, realizing that her love for music could intersect with logical reasoning and problem-solving. She had uncovered a way to see beyond the notes, to understand the structure, the patterns, and the relationships that formed the backbone of every composition. The professor, meanwhile, had confirmed her suspicions. This student's abilities were exceptional, a blend of musical sensitivity and analytical brilliance that could lead to extraordinary achievements. As the student left the academy that evening, she felt a sense of wonder and excitement. She replayed the melodies in her mind, analyzing the patterns she had discovered, imagining new ways to apply her understanding. Music had become more than performance. It was now a language of logic, a system of patterns waiting to be explored. She realized that she had only begun to understand her potential, and that the journey ahead would challenge and inspire her in ways she had never imagined. Walking through the quiet streets, she thought about the professor's words and the puzzles she had solved. She felt a growing confidence, a sense that her abilities were unique and valuable. There was a thrill in realizing that her understanding of music could lead to discoveries not only in performance but in thought itself. Each melody, each rhythm, each chord became a new opportunity to explore the patterns of the world around her. And for the first time, she truly felt the excitement of possibility, knowing that she was on the path to discovering something remarkable about herself and the way she could connect art and intellect. The student arrived at the academy on a crisp morning, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervous energy. The last few sessions had changed the way she saw herself and her abilities. Music was no longer just a source of joy. It had become a field where her creativity and analytical mind met. She wondered what challenges the professor might present today, knowing that each lesson seemed designed to push her further, to reveal her potential in ways she had not yet imagined. The professor greeted her quietly, her expression calm but filled with a sense of purpose. She led the student to the practice room and gestured toward a piano and a small stack of sheet music on the stand. "Today," she said, "we will explore how you handle pressure and complexity. This will test not just your musical skill, but your ability to think critically and adapt." The student nodded, understanding that the session would be different from anything she had done before. The first piece she was asked to play looked deceptively simple. However, as she began, the professor introduced small disruptions, slight tempo changes, unexpected pauses, and irregular dynamics. The student noticed each one immediately. She adjusted her playing instinctively, her mind analyzing the changes and predicting the next movement. It was not just about correcting mistakes. She was interpreting the structure of the music in real time, creating a coherent and expressive performance despite the challenges. After completing the piece, the professor introduced another exercise, this time more complex. She presented a piece filled with intricate rhythms, unusual chord progressions, and hidden patterns. The student examined the sheet music carefully, her eyes scanning for relationships between notes and sequences. As she played, she began to notice symmetry in the melody, recurring motifs, and subtle numerical patterns embedded in the structure. She adjusted her fingers and timing to follow these patterns, transforming a challenging piece into a performance that was both precise and expressive. Throughout the session, the professor continued to raise the difficulty. She added unconventional harmonies, shifted keys unexpectedly, and introduced complex sequences that required immediate adjustment. Most students would have struggled or become frustrated, but the student responded calmly and creatively. She treated each challenge like a puzzle, listening intently, analyzing the structure, and adapting her playing to maintain harmony and rhythm. Her mind worked on multiple levels, combining intuition, logic, and emotional sensitivity. At one point, the professor paused and asked the student to explain her process. The student described how she noticed patterns in the rhythm and melody, predicted the sequence of chords, and adjusted her timing and dynamics accordingly. She spoke about symmetry, relationships between notes, and the mathematical principles underlying the music. The professor listened closely, impressed by the clarity and depth of the student's insight. This was not merely technical skill. It was an extraordinary ability to perceive connections and solve problems in real time. To challenge her further, the professor presented a piece she had never seen before. This composition was unconventional, with hidden numerical sequences and unusual harmonic progressions. The student studied the music for a moment, her mind mapping out the structure before she even touched the keys. As she played, she recognized the patterns embedded in the composition, adjusted for the hidden sequences, and delivered a performance that was both technically flawless and intuitively expressive. The professor watched silently, amazed at how naturally the student integrated analytical thinking into her musical expression. Next, the professor introduced a mental challenge alongside the music. She asked the student to anticipate changes in the melody before they occurred, to predict irregularities and adapt seamlessly. The student's eyes lit up with focus as she listened carefully, identifying relationships and anticipating shifts in tempo and harmony. Each adjustment was precise, each prediction accurate, demonstrating a rare combination of musical intuition and analytical reasoning. By mid-session, the student was fully immersed in the challenges. She began to explore ways to enhance the music, suggesting slight variations in rhythm and dynamics that emphasized the hidden patterns she had discovered. Her performance became more than replication. It became an act of interpretation and creation, blending her understanding of structure with her emotional connection to the music. The professor observed quietly, noting how the student transformed each challenge into an opportunity to express herself and to test her own limits. The professor then introduced a final exercise, designed to integrate everything the student had learned. She presented a highly complex piece combining unusual rhythms, hidden numerical patterns, and unexpected harmonic progressions. She instructed the student to play while identifying the underlying structure and anticipating the sequence of chords and motifs. The student approached the piano with quiet determination. She analyzed the piece mentally, visualizing the patterns and connections before her fingers reached the keys. As she played, her performance revealed her deep understanding of both music and structure. Each note flowed naturally into the next, harmonies resolved perfectly, and hidden sequences emerged seamlessly within the melody. When the final notes ended, there was a moment of silence in the room. The professor smiled, a mixture of pride and admiration in her eyes. She had designed these exercises to challenge every aspect of the student's abilities: technical skill, creativity, analytical reasoning, and emotional expression. The student had met the challenge with grace, intelligence, and originality, proving that her talent was not only exceptional but multidimensional. The professor spoke gently. "You have demonstrated an extraordinary ability to handle complexity, adapt under pressure, and integrate analytical thinking with musical expression. Your mind works in ways that most musicians do not experience. You are capable of achieving great things if you continue to develop both your musical and analytical skills." The student felt a swell of pride and excitement. She understood now that her abilities were unique and that she could approach music in a way that combined creativity and logic, intuition and reasoning. As the session ended, the professor suggested that the student continue exploring pieces that challenged her understanding of structure and patterns. She encouraged her to experiment, to push boundaries, and to integrate her analytical abilities with her emotional expression. The student left the academy that day feeling inspired and motivated, eager to continue her journey. She walked home thinking about the challenges she had faced, the solutions she had discovered, and the potential she had yet to realize. For the first time, she saw music not just as notes on a page, but as a system of patterns, structures, and relationships waiting to be explored. Each challenge she faced was an opportunity to test her understanding, to grow, and to discover new dimensions of her talent. She realized that her journey at the academy was not just about learning music. It was about discovering herself, developing her abilities, and exploring the intersection of art and intellect. And she was ready for every challenge that lay ahead, confident that she could meet them with skill, creativity, and insight. The day of the final performance at the Music Academy arrived, and the student felt a mixture of excitement, nerves, and determination. She had spent weeks preparing, not only practicing difficult pieces but also exploring the patterns, structures, and hidden logic behind every composition she studied. Each lesson with the professor had challenged her to think differently, combining musical expression with analytical insight, and now all of that preparation would be tested in front of an audience. The performance hall was grand and filled with students, teachers, and guests from outside the academy. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. The student took a deep breath as she approached the piano, her fingers brushing over the polished keys. The spotlight shone softly on her, and for a moment, the noise of the audience faded. It was just her and the music, a world she had come to know deeply through both feeling and understanding. The first piece she played was challenging, full of rapid sequences and intricate harmonies. She began slowly, allowing her mind to map out the patterns before her fingers moved. As she played, she instinctively corrected small variations, adjusting tempo and dynamics, making the music flow naturally. Each note was deliberate, each movement precise yet expressive. The audience could feel her confidence and the depth of understanding behind every phrase. The professor, sitting in the front row, watched silently, a proud smile on her face. She had seen many students perform brilliantly, but this performance was different. The student was not merely executing the notes. She was interpreting the music in a way that revealed its hidden structure, the patterns, and the logic that often went unnoticed. She was creating a performance that was both technical and deeply expressive, showing not only skill but also understanding and insight. After the first piece, the student moved on to a composition that included irregular rhythms, unexpected key changes, and complex chord sequences. Many musicians would have struggled to maintain coherence under such conditions, but she played with ease, adjusting to the challenges in real time. Her fingers moved fluidly, guided by both intuition and the analytical understanding she had developed over countless practice sessions. Each measure flowed naturally, the irregularities becoming part of the expression rather than obstacles. The audience began to notice something remarkable. The music had a clarity and coherence that was unusual, a sense that each note and rhythm was part of a greater structure. There was beauty not just in the sound but in the way the patterns unfolded, in the logic that guided the performance. It was subtle, but perceptible to anyone who listened carefully. Whispers of admiration spread through the hall as the student continued, unfazed by the complexity of the pieces. Midway through the performance, the professor had prepared a surprise test. She played a series of notes on a hidden keyboard, introducing unexpected variations into the music. The student immediately recognized the discrepancies and adapted seamlessly, integrating the changes into her playing without missing a beat. Her mind worked quickly to analyze the differences, predict the next movement, and adjust her performance accordingly. It was a display of talent, intelligence, and adaptability that left the audience silent in awe. As the final piece began, it was clear that the student had reached a level of mastery that went beyond technique. She played a composition that combined emotional depth with structural complexity, weaving together patterns she had discovered and internalized over weeks of practice. Every note, every pause, every change in tempo was deliberate, a reflection of both her skill and her understanding of the underlying principles of music. She was telling a story through sound, one that was both beautiful and intellectually engaging. When the last note resonated through the hall, there was a moment of silence. Then, The audience erupted into applause, not just for the technical brilliance but for the way the student had revealed the structure and logic behind the music. The professor stood, clapping proudly, knowing that her student had achieved something extraordinary. She had taken the challenges, the unexpected tests, and the intricate patterns and transformed them into a performance that was both emotional and intellectually remarkable. Backstage, the student felt a rush of relief and accomplishment. She had faced every challenge, adapted to every change, and revealed a side of herself that few had seen. The professor approached her, smiling warmly. "You have done more than I could have imagined," she said. "You have shown that your abilities are rare and extraordinary. Your understanding of music, combined with your analytical insight, is remarkable. You are capable of achieving great things." The student felt a deep sense of pride and gratitude. She realized that her journey had been more than about learning music. It had been about discovering herself, understanding her abilities, and exploring how her mind could connect art with logic. She had learned that challenges were opportunities, that mistakes were lessons, and that true mastery required both creativity and reason. In the weeks that followed, the student continued to explore her talents, taking on new pieces, analyzing patterns, and experimenting with compositions. She received recognition from the academy and beyond, not just for her musical skill but for her unique ability to combine music and analytical thinking. She began to see opportunities to use her talents in innovative ways, bridging art and intellect, performance and problem-solving. Looking back on her journey, she remembered the first day she walked into the academy, the moment she recognized a wrong melody, and the way the professor had guided her through challenges. Each step had been a discovery, each test a revelation. She understood now that her abilities were not just about playing music but about seeing the world in patterns, understanding relationships, and approaching problems with insight and creativity. Her success at the performance hall was not the end. It was a beginning. She had proven to herself and others that she could face complex challenges, adapt creatively, and reveal her unique understanding through her art. The professor's tests had uncovered a hidden genius, one that combined emotion, logic, and expression in a way that few could achieve. And the student knew that she was only starting to explore the full extent of her potential. As she walked home that evening, the music from the performance lingered in her mind. She replayed the sequences, analyzed the patterns, and imagined new ways to explore both music and logic. The applause and admiration faded into the background, replaced by a sense of purpose and possibility. She had discovered a path that was uniquely hers, a way to combine passion with intellect, creativity with reasoning, and she was ready to continue, to learn, to grow, and to explore the limitless possibilities that lay ahead.